everybody. It's nice to be back. My name is Allison Miller. I'm a developmental psychologist. I sit in the School of Public Health and I study children and families and eating behavior and obesity risk. And I am thrilled to tonight introduce a colleague and friend, Ashley Gearhardt. Ashley's research, which you'll hear, I'm sure, a wonderful talk on, is on food addiction. The title of her talk is Can Food Be Addictive? And Ashley, just a few fun facts. She comes to us by way of Michigan. Actually, is an undergraduate in psychology, then was at Yale and worked with Kelly Brownell there, and now is back at U of M in psychology as well and taking up the field. And it's very exciting. And her favorite food is crunchy peanut butter. So without further ado, here's Ashley.
Hi everyone. So it is a complete honor to be able to kick off this really exciting and cool event. And just looking at the lineup of speakers was so exciting. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot tonight. So I'm going to kick us off by talking about whether food can be addictive. A controversial topic and a fun topic, given that we all need to eat and we all have to think about what it is that we're putting in our mouths. So I, as Allison mentioned, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology. I'm in the clinical area. I both have seen patients as well as do research in this area. A lot of my background is actually from the field of alcohol addiction, but I've taken that training and now I apply it to the concept of eating and food. So I like to talk first about our brain and the reward and motivation systems in the brain. Dopamine is a really key component of these systems in our brain that drive us forward to do the behaviors that are best for our survival. So a large aspect of the goal of our brain when it was evolving, the reward systems, was to make sure that we got sufficient calories to survive. And this dopamine system is associated with many aspects of that. It can help us remember where we saw food, learn about cues that signal the availability of food, and motivate us to seek out food, especially when we're hungry. And because for much of human existence, we have developed in a period where there was periods of feast, but more frequently there were periods of famine. And so the brain is sensitized to be making sure that we're getting more calories. And when we see food, that we jump and we eat them. Because of this, the reward and motivation systems of the brain are more sensitive to high-calorie foods than to lower-calorie foods. Because if you found a high-calorie food like berries or a handful of nuts out in the environment, that was really beneficial to enjoy that, to like that, to remember that, to be motivated to seek it out again in the future, because it will help you survive that upcoming period of famine. So the reward system of the brain responds intensely to the cues, to the memories, to the availability, to the consumption of higher calorie foods. So let's take a moment and think about that environment that we existed in when all these systems kind of evolved. And if we think about what was at the top of the kind of reward food hierarchy, what had the most sugar, high calorie sugar, what had the most high calorie fat, the best we could hope for, back out for much of human existence, was fruit, which is naturally high in sugar, or foods like nuts or meat, which were foods like nuts and meat that are naturally high in fat. These foods were relatively scarce, and especially with something like meat, took a lot of effort to acquire. You had to hunt and gather for your fruits, you had to hunt down your meat, so it was very effortful. So let's take a moment and think about how our food environment has changed. With industrialization, we've gotten really good at stripping out and refining those most rewarding ingredients of things like sugar and fat into their purest forms, their most potent forms. And then we take those substances and we combine them into thousands and thousands of delicious and tasty options that are completely evolutionarily novel in the amount of reward they trigger in the brain. And so one question here is, even when you're thinking back, just to get a sense for how new and novel these foods are, if you think back to those naturally occurring, non-processed foods that kind of Mother Nature gives us, they don't really come packaged with both fat and sugar. right? That is rare. That is evolutionarily novel that so many of the foods in our environment now come and they're high in added fats and high in added sugars. One of the questions is that have these foods become potently rewarding and reinforcing enough that they are capable of triggering addictive-like processes in at least some individuals? And some of our rationale for this is when we think about how do you create an addictive substance? You know, addictive substances don't kind of exist in nature. You know, there's no wine river, there's no tree that just has a bunch of marijuana joints on it, right? You know, as humans, we create this. And so we take something, for example, the coca leaf that's reinforcing, wow, this goes fast. The coca leaf that's reinforcing, we refine it, we process it down, and that way it's so much more potent and intensely rewarding than it is in its more naturally occurring form. And the question is, have we done something similar to our food supply? So, one of the questions that my lab asked was how would we identify and understand, given that we all eat and we all get exposed to these sorts of foods, who are the individuals who might be experiencing the most addictive-like responses? And so we developed the Yale Food Addiction Scale, and what this does is it applies the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorders to the context of eating these highly palatable, highly processed foods. We look for things like a loss of control, where you feel like you can't help yourself even if you wanted to. There's continued use despite negative consequences, things like diabetes. You can imagine that people really are trying hard to cut down, but they're just not able to maintain that successfully. And that people report experiences of withdrawal when they do try and cut down, irritability, headaches, intense preoccupation with the foods they're trying not to eat. All of these are classic hallmarks of addiction. And the question is, people are endorsing these in the context of eating. And in a community sample, we find that about 14.6% of people meet the diagnostic cutoff that we would use to diagnose other substance use disorders when it comes to the consumption of highly palatable, highly processed food. I'm out of time, but I'm just going to leave you with this one last thing. We call this food addiction, and the reason we call it this is at the time I started doing this research, we did not have enough research to be able to say these are the types of foods that are more likely to trigger this response. Obviously, it's not all foods. People aren't being like, oh, I just can't get enough kale. I just go home at night and just eat bowls of it. It's just horrible. When we ask people, what foods are you struggling with in this addictive-like way? Here's the most likely culprits. None of these, I'm sure, are surprising to you. There they are things like chocolate, ice cream, French fries, pizza, all these processed foods that are artificially and beyond rewarding anything our brains evolved to handle. Which ones are safer? Beans is at the bottom of the list. There may be an aversive element to that, but it's all these naturally occurring foods that haven't been refined and processed to be so intensely rewarding. So I want to thank you so much. If you're more interested in learning about learning more about my research, this is the link to the website. We have a little faux fast food restaurant in the psych department where we do research on cues and junk food. So thank you so much for your attention.